Happy New Year, everyone. To those who haven't had a chance to say that to so far, very warm welcome to our Strategic Planning Task Force is hosting this live forum with Ken Steele to launch our visioning and planning process for UCW's strategic plan. Today's session will be followed by an important faculty voice forum next week on the 29th and a staff forum on the 4th of February. Please don't miss your opportunity to contribute to UCW's strategic planning process and help us maximize our strengths and realize our aspirations for an exciting future for our university. We're glad you're here today and very much look forward to seeing you either on the 29th or the 4th. Today I'm here and I'm delighted to introduce you to Ken Steele. Ken's audiences include educational leaders and professionals across Canada and the US. He provides ideas and insights into student trends, technological innovation, strategic planning, branding, and recruitment marketing. Ken comes to us today with a rich history of experience and expertise. A couple of highlights: Ken conceived of and co-founded the Academica Group in 2004. After leaving Academica in 2012, he created the Top 10, 10 with Ken. He consults and offers us Canada's leading higher ed news weekly. Ken is here today to give us a big picture context of higher education to inform our strategic planning process. He'll help us to set the context so we can define our vision for UCW's future and the directions that we want to take in the next 5 years. I welcome you here again today and offer you Ken Steele. Ken?
Thanks so much, Cindy, and thank you everyone for joining us. We're at about 80 people now, and I think the doorbell is going to continue. I don't know if everyone's hearing the doorbell, but I'm hearing it each time someone enters the room. I am going to try and get the high level view going for us, stepping way back, looking way forward, and talking a bit about where higher ed is going. And I won't always have music to talk over top of it. So a bit of back to the future feeling. I should probably let that go. I gotta turn it down. I'm going to focus on 3 core areas today. We're going to talk a bit about teaching, about programs, and about supports and student success. It is a sampling of everything we could talk about, obviously. Okay, that's done now. I'm going to turn that down for next time, sorry. It is a high-level overview. I'm going to be moving very quickly. I've got about 10 slides more than I can get through in each section, so I'll probably skip along, and when I run out of time, we'll share the slide deck with you afterwards so you can see anything that we might have had to skip over should it come to that. What I do want to do, as I mentioned, is involve all of you in some real-time polling as we go, and I will capture the results of those polls and embed them in the slide deck that we share, so you'll be able to see what people have contributed from the group, currently 86 of you. And again, I'll just pop that link into the chat. You can click that link and just open a browser window, or you can open it on a smartphone or a tablet. You should not have to provide login information or an identity. We're just doing some anonymous polling. And when you get there, you should see the first question, fairly straightforward, just asking how long you've been working in higher education. There we go. So it's asking how long you've been working in higher education. It's just a single choice, forced choice answer, but it'll give us a quick taste of how many of you are connected in particular. It looks like 54 of you have voted out of 88 who are on the line. So we're getting there. And it looks like the bulk of you, 24 respondents, half of the respondents are in the 1 to 5 year range, which means we've got somewhere between 25 and 125 years of experience in that first bar alone. But then we've got another 60, 70, 80, 180, so 260. We're probably sitting around 600 years of experience or so. And again, we've got 61 of you who've responded out of 87 on the call. So I will push that link back out for you. We've got 600 years of experience working in education, but it's been pointed out by many leaders over the years that when we're in times of sudden and abrupt change, that experience can work against us, that it can put blinders on, it can constrain our choices, it can prevent us from seeing opportunities in front of us. And my job today is to try to push us out of that a little bit so that we can see it more. But first, let's reflect back on those hundreds of years of experience we've got in higher education, and I wonder if you could share 3 or 4 single words that would describe what has changed most in education in the time you've been working in it. Uh, if you want to use a phrase, just put the underscore between the words so that it'll hold together. So we've got yeah, enter your 3 or 4 words, but at the moment it certainly looks like when you think about what's changed most in your experience working in education, technology is of course top of mind, especially today and especially this year. But technology is usually the top of mind thing when you ask people what's changed in the course of their lifetime. Tech is what comes to mind, whether it's horseless carriages or it's Zoom meetings. And wow, that's getting smaller. But we've also got some data-driven decision making. We've got some changing students, online pedagogy, technology-based teaching. We've got some advances, internationalization, quality of education constructs, expectations, pedagogy, internationalization, unmotivated students, new standards, and so on. Plenty of things are changing. And I guess when it comes down to it, I tend to argue, I'm going to bring myself back in here. I tend to argue that they're left to their own devices, human enterprises, whether they're multinationals, organizations, social groups, don't tend to change unless external forces encourage them to change. It's an evolutionary kind of a thing. And there are 9 forces for change that have been impacting higher education for at least the 3 decades I've been watching. And I think they are continuing to force us to change. So to sort of structure what I have to say today, I want to point out that you can think of these in terms of political pressures, whether that's for accountability or for prioritization, objectives, performance metrics, and so on. There are funding pressures that are often controlled by those politicians for public institutions. They are controlled by forces beyond our control, currency fluctuations, willingness to pay, etc. But in general, financial pressure forces institutions to become more efficient, to seek out economies of scale, and to find ways to cope with change that saves money rather than costing money. Demographic pressures are affecting education, and I think I've made the bar a little larger because I think in North America, especially, demographic pressures are probably forcing more change than anything else. Whether we're talking about a declining number of traditional age students in most communities across the country, or we're talking about new demographic groups, non-traditional students, older adults, or for that matter, international students, indigenous students, online students. There's a lot of things that demographics are shifting, those changing students, as you pointed out in the word cloud. We've got increasingly digital natives, both among our students and our staff and faculty. There's an expectation that you can bring your own device, that you can, in fact, access information 24/7, that you can readily register for courses and access support services. And this year in particular, the expectation that we should be able to access libraries, student services, faculty members, classrooms in an online format has become pretty much standardized. Students are shifting and evolving. They're not just digital, but they're also more and more social. They're concerned with how to learn collaboratively. They're engaged in social media. They are looking for an opportunity, really, to interact with a cohort of students, and I'll talk a bit about that. Even more impactfully, a lot of students we're finding in the past 10 years have been getting more and more anxious. So on campuses, mental health supports and supporting faculty and staff in mental wellness and work-life balance has become an increasing priority, particularly over the last year. But these trends were all in place well before that. Our students are increasingly careerist. They're fixated on a return on investment, starting salaries, how quickly they're going to get into a job. International students are looking to Canada as, in many cases, as a path for immigration, and they want some certainties that they're going to be able to get work experience and an opportunity to get out into the workforce. And I will certainly talk about that today. Industry is changing around us. We're seeing we're seeing what World Economic Forum is calling a fourth industrial revolution. Automation, robotics, artificial intelligence are gradually evolving the career paths our students can take. And their sense of the skills they want students to have has been shifting like a pendulum, really. So we've got some pressure to change from the employer community, from industry and employers. And then last and probably weakest, we've got pressure from scientific understanding to evolve what we do. So we've got we've got the scholarship of teaching and learning. We've got big data. We've got a whole range of cognitive neuroscience and the psychology of learning, telling us how we can improve on what we do. And I'd say it's not pushing us very hard to change, but as we look at changing in order to better support anxious students, careerist students, new demographic groups, and do so with less and less money in a digital way, the scientific understanding, the big data, the other information helps to guide what we do. And I've added one more, of course, to the 9 this year. COVID-19 has come along to radically shake up what we thought of as a fairly stable society. It hasn't so much introduced new pressures as it has accelerated all the old pressures. So more and more concern about supporting students who are from underprivileged backgrounds and may not have digital access, overcoming the digital divide. More and more concern about how to handle mental health. More and more concern about how to be digital. It's shifted things around and accelerated things more than it has radically changed the spectrum of pressures. And I would argue that in response to those 9 pressures, accelerated by COVID, we've got about a dozen ways in which higher ed institutions have been evolving over the last 3 decades to try to accommodate those pressures for change. So we see more and more efforts at efficiencies and economy of scale, to pursue new markets like online students and international students, to pursue alternative revenue streams, to support students, to retain them and to ensure success. To change up our pedagogical approach, our facilities, our programming offerings, and to partner with industry and explore possibilities around new credentials. And we'll touch on a lot of those today. I don't think I can go very deep into any of them in the time we've got, because I also want to give you some time to think and talk. But that is in a nutshell the overview, and I spend about a half an hour exploring that slide in 2 episodes of my webcast 10 with Ken. If you're curious, the links will be in the slide deck that I'll share back with you afterwards. When you talk to Canadians about how COVID is going to impact education, 82% of them are convinced that we're not going to be going back to normal after this. That's as of August. The opinions are going to shift. I suspect they will weaken a bit, but the reality is it has made some permanent changes in our comfort level with Zoom meetings, with Zoom conferences, with blended and hybrid delivery. I think we're going to see that continue. So I want to start by talking about the changes in teaching and learning, the first of those 3 big categories. And as I said, those are driven by everything from funding through to increasingly careerist and anxious students. The teaching and learning changes we're seeing have come about quite abruptly and quickly, really, compared to what's happened in the past. In fact, higher education has often been criticized by folks like Strayer University for the speed at which it seems to change.
The world is changing at a rate like never before. So, why isn't education? Raise your hand if you could use an education that's actually modern, actually affordable, and actually personal. If you're one of the 35 million Americans who hasn't finished your degree, well, Strayer's here to help. Welcome to the future of education.
So the reality is, of course, this year we discovered just how quickly educators could change. We've all pivoted on a dime, really, towards online emergency remote delivery. Lecture capture is now something everyone's had some experience with. It was a growing theme over the last decade, and certainly there are advantages to using it, I'm going to argue. But we also know from studies of 1 million students in California, for example, that there's about a 14% performance hit for a student taking an online course as opposed to a student taking a face-to-face course. It is not equitable, and it disadvantages students who are disadvantaged to begin with disproportionately. So we know there's an inequity to online delivery purely. But what we have found at the same time is some massive studies have demonstrated that, in fact, blended delivery improves learning outcomes for students from both sides. So it's better learning outcomes by blended delivery than by purely face-to-face or by purely online. That blended can take the form of lectures recorded and classes spent in active learning. It can take the form of online programs with some brief residencies, kind of like Royal Roads does. It can go in a lot of different directions, but ultimately it is about blending. And I think that trend has been pretty clear for a couple of decades now. Something that was an interesting curiosity 2 years ago was high flex learning that takes blended delivery or hybrid delivery and makes it even more flexible by allowing a student to choose day to day whether they're going to come to class physically, whether they're going to attend class synchronously online, or whether they're going to catch the class later asynchronously online. Cambrian College and about a dozen institutions in North America were experimenting with this before COVID. And they had developed some programs where the instructors could work with a classroom physically present, but simultaneously work with students online in programs that were also designed to accommodate asynchronous online students. It's a bit complicated. It takes some getting used to. But I do talk with one of the leading practitioners in Canada, Jenny Heyman, about it in an episode of 10 with Ken that we aired early in the pandemic. There's been a lot more interest in HyFlex now than ever before. And I think from a perspective of ensuring academic and business continuity for our institutions, there will be more interest in hybrid and HyFlex for several years now. There's also been a groundswell of interest in open electronic resources, free peer-reviewed electronic textbooks. BC has been in the vanguard on that front. Since the pandemic, the McConnell Foundation has pumped some money into an OER consortium to try to increase the resources available for students. And again, it's about ensuring access regardless of what country's firewall they're behind, regardless of what they have to pay in order to access textbooks, and equity. Textbooks are also, though, getting more and more sophisticated. They're not simply giving us the content in a linear way. They're becoming nonlinear. They're becoming personalized adaptive learning platforms that effectively monitor the student's learning and assess what they've mastered, what they haven't, circle back to ensure they've caught concepts. And effectively, as David Levin has said, the book is reading the student. And it's doing so in a way that's not humanly possible for a teacher. Dreambox Learning brags that their adaptive learning software reads 48,000 data points per student per hour. So millions and millions of data points are being gathered about how they're progressing through the material, about what format they seem to learn best in. And essentially, the teacher can monitor how the entire classroom is progressing. Those adaptive learning platforms or smart textbooks are much more common in first-year foundational courses, in bridging courses, and remedial courses than they are in typical undergraduate courses, but it's a direction that things seem to be moving in. Electronic textbooks also make it possible for us to bring much more than just photographs, graphs, maps. We can immerse the student in virtual reality simulations, whether of a geographic destination, of a historical time period. We can take them to long destroyed archaeological digs. We can take them to ancient Rome. We can take them into a world-class biochem laboratory and allow them to perform simulated biology experiments that would be dangerous to perform in an actual laboratory. So we're taking education to students wherever they are through some increasingly interesting technologies. And it's not just pure pedagogy, it's also experiential learning that's coming through in simulations. Whether it's radiography simulations for students who need to learn how to use X-ray machinery, whether it's flight simulators or aeronautical repair simulators or aircraft crash scene investigation simulators, wind turbine engineering programs, or oil rigs simulated for students who need to learn about what it would actually be like to walk through the workplace, to interact with equipment. We've got more and more sophisticated simulations out there, and they touch on subjects we might not automatically think of too, like social workers who can go through a VR simulation of a home visit to do risk assessment for students, for children living with in dangerous situations, or they can simulate emergency crisis situations for paramedic students. They can simulate a classroom with difficult students for a teacher's college student, or they can simulate an actual surgical procedure for students in dental surgery, brain surgery, etc. Like a flight simulator, they can learn with minimal risk to the student, minimal risk to themselves, minimal risks to the patient by learning in a simulated environment first. The other thing that was coming long before the pandemic, but that's been pushed forward by our increasing awareness of inequity, is Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, an effort to try to elegantly build into coursework the options for students to access information in different formats, whether it's Braille or audiobook, whether it's video clips or written text, to engage with their classmates in written form, in personal form, in a structured way or an unstructured way, to interact and to be assessed in different ways as well, whether through exams or through project work, poster sessions, etc. UDL is an effort to try to create more options for the learner, and learners with more options, it's been quite firmly demonstrated, are more engaged and learn more in the end than learners without options. Technology is going to take us even further than any of those things that I've described going forward. We have seen some interesting experiments at Georgia Tech using IBM's Watson cognitive computing platform to create a simulation of a teaching assistant for an online graduate course. They named her Jill Watson, and the students couldn't distinguish between Jill and the human TAs on their course, but did think Jill deserved the TA of the Year award for the speed with which she responded to questions and the accuracy of her answers. So we're going to see technologies like that start to impact what we do. The other thing that is becoming increasingly clear, both from firsthand experience of faculty in the classroom and from study after study of learning and psychology, is that attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. This is what the news might look like if we truly met people's attention spans.
Welcome to the news at 6. Sweden invades Russia. Murder in Manhattan. Weather cold. In sports, win, 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 lose. And Grandma loves baking. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Personally, I do think that a 6-second newscast would have some real advantages over the ones we watch now. A provost at Maryland has observed that lecture could be thought of as toxic to student learning. And really, I would argue it's toxic in the same way that some vitamins are toxic. They're healthy for you in small doses. They give you inspiration, they can motivate you, they can inform you. But in large doses, they become toxic. And the trick is to manage that weight. So when I did a video called The Death of Lecture, it's not truly that it's dying, but it is certainly something we're reconsidering. And this year of pandemic has forced us to reconsider it more than ever. We know from the cognitive neuroscientists that learning doesn't happen by dumping a bunch of information into people's heads. It happens by allowing them to grapple with questions, to co-construct an understanding with their fellow learners, with their teachers, and it's that act of understanding that is the lasting product of education. It is not the memorization of facts. Our minds are not computer banks that you fill full of data. And that has become clearer and clearer in study after study. We're seeing more and more universities moving away from lecture theaters towards flipped active learning classrooms, where small groups of students can engage with their coursework, can work on exercises, can push their understanding, and can co-create an understanding. At UBC, the Wyman Institute found, in fact, that you could double the learning outcome of students in a first-year engineering course by giving them an active learning program for a few weeks instead of a passive lecture-based learning model. The same test, the students did twice as well from an active environment. And we know that this crop of young people are much more interested in interactive learning, social learning. 80% of Generation Z have said they want to study with their friends rather than alone at night. And half of them will do it using online platforms, which is no longer surprising. But back in 2016, half of the students who wanted to study with their friends were using FaceTime, they were using Facebook Live, they were using Zoom or other apps to create that simulation of working together. From a faculty perspective, what does this mean? It means that there are things we can do to encourage students to learn collaboratively that don't actually require a great deal more work from us. And I thought it was particularly inspiring listening to this one professor, Adam Grant, from the Wharton School at Pennsylvania, talking about a small change he made to 0.5% of his grading structure that radically transformed how his students worked. This is an excerpt from a presentation he gave at the World Economic Forum, but hopefully it gives you the sense.
I also worry a lot that we're not teaching any collaboration at all. I've watched in my classroom year after year, and I know this has happened to none of you, but I assign a group paper to be written, and inevitably just one person writes it and no one else does anything. Yeah. A couple years ago, I decided to try a little experiment, and I said, look, I actually want to give students some practice in real collaboration, knowing that's such a critical part of their future lives at work. And so I told them I had a final exam, and I said, for the multiple choice section, it's going to be extremely difficult. The one question you don't know the answer to, you can write down the name of a classmate who you think knows the answer. And if they get it right, you get the points too. Wow. Students had always studied completely independently. They felt like they were competing against each other. The moment I announced this, and it affects less than 1% of their final exam grade, which is less than 30% of their total grade, they immediately started a group me where the entire class was coordinating and collaborating, sharing notes, teaching each other who knew what, and the entire class's average went up 3% from that. Wow. And I think it's a very small step, but I think we have a responsibility to do more to teach students how to collaborate.
Personally, I'm not great at this myself, but I do think that he's got a point. Getting people engaged and collaborating is important, and we're going to do that in just a minute now ourselves. What I do want to do, though, is give you one overall schema to kind of organize some of the trends that seem to be moving through teaching and learning innovation, and then set you to think about it amongst yourselves for 10 minutes, and to consider which of these do you think have the most potential to transform what we do at University Canada West. So in a way, I think what we've seen is the traditional passive or authoritative teaching model of lectures based on church sermons in the ancient days, of prescribed readings and video lecture recordings, of structuring the curriculum in a scaffolded way, allowing students to be self-paced perhaps, but essentially it's a linear self-paced passive learning model. We're in the more sophisticated models like this personalized adaptive textbooks are looking for mastery of each section of a chapter before they move students along. And there's some attention increasingly being paid to learning styles, to personalized instruction, to universal design for learning, to meet students' needs where they are. At its kind of most innovative level, the passive model can allow a student to be more self-directed, curiosity-driven, independent study. It can still be fairly traditional learning, but it can be self-directed. Then I think there's these collaborative or social active learning models that are increasingly being explored in universities. That includes social learning in group work. Business schools have been doing this a long time, of course, with case studies and group work. Constructive model of learning rather than a passive absorption model of learning. Situated learning, learning in a simulated environment of a business rather than reading about it in the abstract. A formative kind of assessment, giving students feedback in real time that helps them improve rather than summative evaluation that makes them feel judged once their work is completed. And peer teaching, which is a way in which students can be motivated to make a good impression, to master content so that they can share it with their peers. These are things that have been used in a variety of different ways over the years, but these are all evolving innovations that are being pushed in new directions. And then at the most radical end of things, I suppose, is the experiential learning side of things. And I will talk a bit more about this when we talk about program innovations. Whether that is about inquiry-based learning, where students formulate a hypothesis and explore it, or it's actually experiential learning, work-integrated learning opportunities, gamification, and opportunities to solve problems. Business case studies are an example of that kind of an approach, I suppose. It is about ensuring there's a bit of a grab bag on this side of my slide, but ensuring that we're stretching students without breaking them. We're giving them just enough challenge to keep them engaged and interested without so much challenge that they shut down. There is a movement afoot to allow people to accumulate their knowledge from a broad range of sources and simply educate themselves. This is more common at the elementary level than anywhere else, where there's talk of deschooling. But I will talk a bit later about competency-based education, grades, badging, and other ways of recognizing learning. So this is my attempt to put on a single slide the innovations in teaching and learning that seem to be most prominent out there. And what I want to do now is give you about 10 minutes in small groups. So there's 105 of you here. I think I'll put you into 25 groups of 4 or 5 people. Hopefully that will work. And I'll ask you to tackle this one question, which gives you that slide. It'll give you that one slide and then ask you to click on the 3 things that you think could offer the most potential for UCW students in the next few years. But I think it'll be more interesting if we can do that in dialogue. So I'm going to pose that question to you. Basically, what 3 do you think offer the most potential for students in the years ahead? And let's see if I can do my breakout rooms quickly. Okay, so what I'm seeing is that I think everybody's back now, 97. As you're looking at these choices, let me make this as big as I can for you. In general, the most of you clicked experiential learning, work-integrated learning, problem solving, and so on. There's 28% of the clicks over there. I will show you the result in the slide deck, obviously, but your top choice is experiential, followed by self-direction, followed by looks like peer teaching, and then social learning. So and learning styles as another piece that people are thinking would be useful. So what we've got next then is after talking about teaching and learning methods, I want to talk a bit about program trends, which are overlapping, admittedly, because we've got a number of aspects of teaching and learning that are about programs. But what we teach and how we teach it is partly driven, of course, where our students are going to graduate and go work, and certainly whole new sectors of the economy, new business models, new job descriptions are arising because of technological and social change, everything from biomeat engineering to vertical farming to biohacking security and so on. We know that robotics has transformed manufacturing long ago. Robotics is starting to transform construction trades. There's a semi-autonomous mason that can lay 3,000 bricks a day, which is 3 times a human bricklayer's speed, with greater accuracy based on CAD/CAM drawings. We've got automated tellers at grocery stores. We've got self-driving vehicles that are getting better and better. And within 5 or 10 years, we're going to have self-driving taxi cabs, self-driving campus buses, self-driving trucks. And driving yourself will be kind of a novelty. We've got automated kitchens that are increasingly robotic, especially in places like San Diego where they can't afford to pay human cooks to cook. And we've got gourmet automated kitchens that are increasingly able to emulate the cooking style of a master chef in your own home. So, and then do their own dishes as well. So I'm waiting for one of those for sure. We've got robots that can learn to do things just by observing. We've got robots that are increasingly alert to your tone of voice and facial expression and make intuitive guesses almost. Their algorithms are designed to interpret your emotional state. So these are being used for customer service, for various forms of personal support worker. We've got robots that are becoming increasingly adept at emulating human behavior on the battlefield, on the construction site. Brand new prototype that can hang drywall single-handedly using a human power drill. That could come in handy some days when you're doing drywalling. And of course, algorithms that are increasingly doing the work of professionals, whether it's interpreting medical scans, as they're doing in cancer treatments, whether it's simple personal assistant kinds of tasks like placing a phone call to book a restaurant table or to book a hair appointment. Google's got tools that are increasingly natural sounding in doing that. And over in China, we've got AI-driven artificial news anchors who can read the news based on a text file, can do so in multiple languages, and can do so without ever disagreeing with the official party line. So automation and robotics and AI algorithms are taking over a vast range of tasks and chores that we wouldn't normally associate with robotics. And every time a think tank sits down to go through job description by job description what the future holds, they seem to wind up where the Oxford Future of Humanity Institute came, in saying that by 2045, about 45% of jobs are going to be automated away, and the rest of jobs are going to be significantly changed through the automation. So we're going to be in a gradual period here in which automation transforms routine tasks in particular. Kai-Fu Lee has suggested you can think about human work on a spectrum from routine, repetitive tasks through to more complex and creative ones. And essentially, he argues AI is starting at the left of this spectrum, is automating things away very quickly. In the next few years, we're going to see the repetitive and routine fully automated. But it may take longer to get to the creative and strategic thinking at the other end of the spectrum. He also argues that if you put human tasks on a second axis, you can think about them not only in terms of creativity and strategy, but also in terms of what he calls compassion. And I would call it interpersonal skills or something like that. That in effect, we've got tasks that are growing out there that are requiring interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence, EQ. So he argues the routine tasks that don't require interpersonal skills will be done completely by AI. The less routine tasks that still don't require interpersonal skills will be done hand in hand with AIs. The routine tasks like interpreting MRI scans to look for signs of cancer can be done in the background by an AI with a human face toward the patient. And then there are tasks in this fourth quadrant that AIs are going to be always in second fiddle position, really. That humans will take the lead where it's creative and strategic, where it's interdisciplinary, and where it is interpersonal. And so as we think about how to prepare our students to graduate into the world of 20 or 30 years from now, that's certainly one of the things we need to keep in mind. The president at Northwestern has argued that what What we're really good at in higher ed is focusing in a discipline and creating experts who master convergent thinking. But narrow AI, the kind that we're going to have for the next few decades, is getting really, really good at that. Robots can do convergent thinking. What they can't do is divergent thinking. They can't do interdisciplinary thinking. They can't put things in context, understand the human implications. That's the place where human beings are going to still have preeminence, really. And because of that value of interdisciplinarity, we're seeing more and more research centers at interdisciplinary centers, and we're seeing more and more programming offered that combine disciplines. So for example, we've got McMaster University's combination degree program offered by their School of Medicine, Engineering, and Business. And there are so many more examples if we had time, but we do not have time. Like the BCom of Business and Humanities that's also at McMaster. So I think we're seeing more and more happening at the interdisciplinary nexus, and certainly we could explore that. At Simon Fraser, their latest academic plan has actually said that it's time to start talking about a post-disciplinary conceptualization of knowledge, that we're moving out of the traditional disciplines more and more as time goes on. There's also been a pretty strong trend over the last decade to think about new ways to credential learning rather than dividing up a discipline into courses that are roughly a semester in length, and measuring students' performance within each of those gated boxes. And the student who spreads their ignorance evenly between those courses passes the course. Or passes the credential, gets the diploma, the degree program. On the other hand, there are more and more interest in both stackable, smaller certificates programs, but also in looking at ways of recognizing learning based on mastered skills and competencies, of badging students for the specific things that they have learned how to do or have memorized, and leaving open the opportunity for them to fill in the gaps with the things they haven't mastered yet. So a badging approach to knowledge is much more precise, really, in terms of what it tells an employer about what a student can and cannot do. They might, instead of having one degree or a transcript with 20 courses, they might have hundreds or even thousands of micro-credentialed badges in their e-portfolio. You need to use software to evaluate those applicants, and we're still a ways from moving in that direction, but there is more and more interest in assessing competencies in students and credentialing them based on that. More and more universities have joined the Competency-Based Education Network. More and more experiments are happening, even here in Canada, with blockchain certificates and badges as a way of recognizing student learning. And really, we're also seeing a dividing line between industry and academe melting as we see institutions injecting curriculum developed by industry into their programs. So, for instance, IT programs with Microsoft or Google credentials. We see degree programs designed specifically for a given bank. And we see major companies like Amazon promising to spend almost $1 billion on developing their own university, delivering their own credentials to their own workers who need to be upskilled as they increasingly use robots to take their places in the warehouses. I mentioned at the very beginning that we've got students more and more concerned about work experiences, experiential learning opportunities. And a few years ago, again, it was a novelty that Ripen was developing opportunities for students to get co-op learning experiences online. It was radically new for an online student to be able to get an online co-op to go along with their program. In the past year, demand for Ripen has exploded, and more institutions are looking at that and a few other platforms to try to give students online work experience. Other institutions have been trying to give students work experiences inside their own institution. So Niagara College, for example, has created a whole series of what they call learning enterprises on campus, everything from a vineyard and a winery to a commercial brewery, a culinary arts center, a greenhouse, an aesthetics salon, and more. And these learning businesses give students an opportunity to get work experience, and they generate a profit, particularly where alcohol is involved, a profit for the college of sometimes as much as $1 million a year. One of the more interesting examples, I think, of work integrated with academics is at Carleton University, where they've partnered with Shopify on a 4-year IT degree program that Shopify is calling a developer degree or a dev degree. Students are selected from the IT program, about a dozen of them a year. They're hired by Shopify for $40,000 a year. They're given a free laptop. Shopify pays their tuition, and they attend, effectively, they're considered full-time students at Carleton, but also full-time employees at Shopify. And they're spending half their time at each spot, learning from faculty, learning from engineers at Shopify. By the end of their 4-year degree program, they've made money, they've got work experience, and hopefully they've got a job offer from Shopify as well. It's one of the more promising, I guess one of the more out there examples of what work integrated learning is starting to look like. And finally, experiential learning is sometimes about learning on the job, but not with an employer, learning as your own entrepreneur. And we're seeing more and more entrepreneurship incubators and centers, maker spaces, a whole range of things, thousands of them across the country. I've done a number of episodes on these at Waterloo. I also spent some time at Radius over at Simon Fraser, looking at the flip side of this, at social venture incubation. Students who want to make the world a better place through a business model that's not ultimately focused on generating revenue specifically. So I want to give you guys another question to break out for a few minutes, and then I will read through all the chat stuff because, wow, you guys have been busy typing. I'm glad you're engaged. I'm glad that you're with me so far. And this time I want to give you a long form question to answer. So the question is going to be, how can we better prepare our students for the future when we don't really know what that future is going to look like? So how do we prepare them nimbly, flexibly for an ambiguous and uncertain future? And these are full sentence answers, if you like, or a phrase. You can enter as many as you like of your own. I'd say if everyone enters 7, we'll hit the limit with 100 participants. But enter some ideas, and then I'll give you a warning again about 8 minutes from now to take a look at the list of things that other people have entered in their discussions, and to vote up the things that you think look like the most promising ideas. So it's a combination of generating some ideas in conversation and by yourself, and then voting on the results. And we'll take a look at what you come up with. Okay, looks like we have about 50 back. We're getting there. You're probably seeing what I mean, that by the end of the day or into tomorrow, a lot of the things you're going to remember about our session today are either the flashy, colorful video clips I shared, or they're the discussions you had in those 2 breakouts. So we spent 20 minutes in breakouts, over 90 minutes, but they tend to create some of the more lasting memory because you're contributing to the discussion. The things you've said are the things you'll remember tomorrow more than anything else. All right, we're at 89 people back in the room, so most people are back now. So currently, some of the thoughts about how to prepare students for an uncertain future that are floating to the top include teaching them to be flexible, teaching them to be open-minded learners and problem solvers. Generic skills like critical thinking and problem solving, teaching students to react quickly and be responsive. I think in general, we need to teach our students to have a growth mindset, to be lifelong learners, to be flexible, and to be open to change, just as we ourselves need to be those things and our institutions need to be those things. So it's, if nothing else, I think COVID has taught us that as a particularly hard lesson this year. We've got about 14 minutes left, and there is some content I want to make sure I get through for those of you who are working on the student services side in particular, but also to try to emphasize the connection really between what happens in the classroom and how we support the students outside of the classroom. I think those are important points that we want to make sure we get to, and I'm probably going to have to skim over things just a little more than I might like, but I will do my best here to. I'm talking about student services and success. You can continue to vote on that question, by the way, and I will put the final results in the slide deck that we circulate back as well, so you'll be able to see how it shook out, and you'll be able to read all of the answers, not just the top few. So in response to those changing students and our changing drive to serve those students, we've got a bunch of different initiatives institutions have been undertaking to try to support them. More and more, what I hear colleges and universities talking about is personalizing the services, personalizing the degree pathway, personalizing the experience of being a student, using experiential learning, using outcome-based learning or competency-based assessments, using work-integrated learning, and so on. All of these things we've been talking about, but doing so in a way that ultimately is personalized to help the student. And we're seeing technologies deployed to assist with that. Especially this year, more and more institutions have been deploying chatbots on their website that can take a natural language question and respond to it. In the case of the University of Alberta's chatbot, Vera can respond in more than 100 languages to questions posed in more than 100 languages, 24/7, 364. So it is certainly one way to service students on the website. And we're seeing similar kinds of chatbots deployed to answer frequently asked questions in libraries, to answer frequently asked questions of student services. York University has deployed what they call a conversational AI using IBM's Watson platform again, Savvy, that can respond to students' questions in English and French. They can, in many cases, when they deploy the software, it can respond to voice prompts as well. Let me see if I can skip. There we go. I knew there's a way to do this. You can watch that video clip later if you're curious. I don't have time to show it to you, but I think AI is getting more and more sophisticated as we go forward, and it's quite daunting, really, how much we're going to see AIs doing our work for us. It's going to mean students get much more service 24/7 without us needing to work 24/7. What we've seen at Canadian universities over the last couple of decades is a steady increase in the proportion of the budget being spent on student services, support services, mental health services, psychology services, 600% increase by 2014 compared to 1980. We're also seeing more and more institutions who are looking seriously at the way that they structure their programming, the way they deliver their services, to say not just how do we intervene to fix our students so they can succeed, but how do we change what we're doing so that it's better at serving the student. Any marital counselor will tell you that it's certainly easier to change yourself than it is to change someone else. So can we change what we do in some fashion? What we're seeing is institutions investing significant amounts of money to fine-tune key gateway courses that students seem to be failing out of. University of Michigan spending $5 million to tune these courses that most students have to take and that most students struggle with, to ensure that they're being delivered in as effective a way as possible, that the students are being evaluated in key ways, that they are effectively, that they're given every chance to succeed possible. Another example of a way in which we can help students persist that isn't obvious and intuitively obvious. It has been found that if you simply fine-tune the language in a probation letter that is sent to a student, you can significantly increase their likelihood to feel motivated to try to improve rather than to feel demotivated and to give up. So being careful how we word things in meetings, in correspondence with students, as well as how we design our courses, and ensuring that we intervene as early as possible in the program so that they're not too far off the track by the time we start trying to support them to get through. There are a number of interesting examples, and if I were running on time, I would share a clip from this one at McMaster, where they have designed an onboarding program that's like a 3-week orientation program that includes some remedial math and science to prepare them for first-year engineering, but it also builds a sense of community and cohort, and it prepares those students to succeed in the course. Georgia State University has done more than anyone else in the world, really, to try to ensure student success. And among other things, they've pored over a decade of data from tens of thousands of students and found there are 800 early warning indicators that are correlated with a tendency to drop out. So what they do now is every single night, their entire student services system runs through those 800 indicators on all of their students. And it identifies the students that are starting to show worrisome patterns, passes them to a team of dedicated advisors who have been given 24 hours to reach out to those students and proactively offer them support services based on the worrisome signals that the software is detecting. So on a large scale, when you've got 20,000 students, you can do this kind of thing. And if you hire 30 people, you can do 50,000 interventions a year, as they are doing. But the basic model is one that I think we can learn from at any scale, that if we watch for early warning signs, we reach out proactively and offer some support to the student, we can have a statistically significant double-digit impact, really, on student retention and success by getting them back on track before they're too far off track. In this year of online learning that so many institutions are stuck in, we can learn from the purely online institutions, Arizona Online, for example, that dedicate a success coach to each student. I mean, they have multiple students, but each student knows they have a dedicated success coach who connects with them regularly, keeps them on track, makes them accountable, and ensures that they stay on track. We also see efforts to try to reach out proactively with interventions from advisors at specific times of the year, in specific ways. And if I had the time, we could talk a little bit more about that. But suffice it to say, we're seeing more sophisticated interventions all the time, especially as we start attracting more international students. And I know UCW, you've got lots of international students. We are increasingly aware of the fact here in Canada that they succeed fairly well, really, academically. 60% of international students in Canada reported on a survey 5 years back a lot of success academically, but considerably less success. Only about 30% of them said a lot of success in terms of getting engaged socially, involved in campus activities. And we know from a lot of different sources, I've done a few interviews with Janet Morrison, who used to be a VP at York University and is now the president at Sheridan College, that sense of social cohesion, of community engagement is critical for students to actually learn. And it's particularly challenging for those international students. So we see a whole range of different efforts to try to set up student buddy systems, mentor systems, electronically or otherwise, in order to ensure that sense of personal connection to other students. In BC, there's been significant energy poured into things like the Okanagan Accord, looking at how to ensure well-being for students, for faculty and staff on campus. And particularly over the last year, we've been paying more and more attention to this whole issue, and it could be the entire topic for the day. I just don't have time to do with it. Instead of therapy dogs, which is the way we used to deal with this, we're now seeing more and more examples of institutions deploying online tools, self-help tools, triage tools, online counseling services to try to meet students where they are and to support their mental wellness. I'd like to think, when I look back on 2020, 2021, the experience of this pandemic, that, like Albert Camus argued in his novel La Peste, that there's something about hardship like a plague that brings out the best in some people and helps us to rise above ourselves. Certainly what I think we're seeing is higher education is being forced to move from a very authoritarian, strict, and inflexible approach to a much more compassionate and flexible approach to dealing with our students, whether we're talking about financially, offering them bursaries or some kinds of flexibility in payment, waiving the requirements for doctor's notes if they need to reschedule an exam. We're seeing more and more flexibility in pass-fail grading, in offering OER texts, and so on. And some of that compassion extends to faculty and staff too, whether that means more flexibility about remote work, more flexibility about pausing the tenure clock, and so on. I was struck by something that Santa Ono said at a webinar a month or so ago, when he emphasized that it's really important, and it's tough at a place like UBC, but I think it's tough for anybody in an academic environment, to give ourselves a break, and that this year more than anything, that's what we need to do. We need to accept that things just might not be perfect. And what Benoit Bacon, the president at Carleton, said on a panel with me a month or so ago was that it's not just about having a department that's responsible for mental health or that's responsible for support services. It's about transforming everything we do, our curriculum, our research, our teaching, so that it's engaged with this idea of wellness and balance for everybody on our campus. Anyway, so I didn't mean to go quite that long. We got 2 minutes left, but I did want to give it a chance for some questions, and we can either do that in the chat, or I can take you can feel free to unmute and just ask a question. We can have a conversation. I'm not sure. I'm happy to stay a little longer, but I know some of you are probably going to need to go.
May I ask a question, Ken?
Yes, absolutely, Phyllis.
Okay, so I'm affiliated with 2 universities, and I'm just looking at the balance here. So we are providing more to students, but at the same time, I hear some faculty saying, really hard nose on plagiarism, blaming the students. This attitude is still coming out, this very blaming attitude around things like plagiarism. Where in fact we've made significant development around. It's not a blame game. We don't need to demonize the student. Okay?
Right.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking, the language I heard in a recent orientation, where someone was speaking to a new group of international students, and he was saying, "Well, we're going to follow you. You're not going to allow to cheat." That kind of and this is within the last week. This is that kind of very rigid language to a new group of international students. What does it say to them?
I think the folks who are, front line, probably you yourself, Phyllis, and a lot of people in the room, have much more of a detailed sense of how this works than I do. But as I understand it, there is a lot of misunderstanding about what academic integrity means from students in different cultures. And that's the first hurdle to get over. It's like talking to someone who speaks a different language. They also come from a different academic tradition in which concepts of plagiarism are completely foreign. And so trying to be patient with them is certainly challenging. And a lot of it tends to fall on library staff to kind of work with students on how to document their sources, how to avoid committing plagiarism unintentionally. I think more and more we're seeing institutions that at a minimum will give students 1 or 2 strikes before they come down hard on them. But it is a challenge, and I certainly understand the desire to have academic rigor and the frustration at people who just don't seem to come from a different planet, right?
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Yeah.
We are working on that, and we have changed the academic integrity policy, and we're about to do a training workshop process and we have introduced educational responses and a step approach. So you'll see some differences, and we are teaching academic integrity in the Learning for Success workshops. So we are trying. It's a long road sometimes, right? So people have certain preconceived ideas, and we're trying to help them see a broader view of that.
Yeah, I think fundamentally it's a question of changing from the traditional academic mindset. I mean, I watched The Paper Chase when I was young as a TV series, in which you got this really crusty professor who just seems to enjoy beating it out of their students. And we've all had professors like that. but I think there's a different model. Instead of saying, let's grade everyone on a curve and get rid of the low hanging fruit, um, to say, if we take a growth mindset to this and we say everyone has the potential to learn and develop, they're not a D student for the rest of their life. They have the chance to learn. How do we ensure that we support them in their learning? How do we get them interested in their learning? And how do we look at them as somebody that can actually grow and change and learn, rather than somebody that we're just grading on a curve? They came in as a D student, they're still a D student when they're done. Then you didn't do your job as a teacher. Your job should be to try to move them along that scale somehow, not to decide where they belong. Some institutions look at separating out grading from teaching, and I sometimes wonder about that, whether if the the driving instructor and the driving examiner were different people, does that change the relationship with your teacher? And I don't know that is an easy thing to implement.
Hi, Ken, and everybody. I have a question.
Acosta, sure.
Yes. First of all, I used to enjoy the paper chase too.
Showing our age, I guess. Yeah.
It's just a thought, and I just wanted to see your thoughts about this. A lot of institutions everywhere are all kind of doing the same thing. The focus, maybe. Sorry if there's feedback.
I'm not hearing it.
They're all kind of doing the same kind of thing. The focus lately is universal learning design, emphasis on the mental well-being of our students and all that. Is there room for uniqueness? For example, uniqueness in anything, in programming, or maybe a university has a niche program and it makes it different from everybody else. I don't hear that lately. I hear a lot of, or whatever success might be. It could be more funding to a university, more Nobel Prizes from faculty, or more development, or anything that's different from what everybody else is doing.
Right.
Do you see that? Is there a movement, or not at all, about being different?
Well, not this year. I think this year people are just trying to get by, and if anything, a lot of the differences between institutions have disappeared for students if they're studying largely online. But I think in general, yeah, my real discipline is as a marketer looking at institutional branding and differentiation, and so I'm always looking for it. And I think there is room for it, absolutely. I think it's the only way to succeed if you start offering an online degree program to an entire planet with thousands of choices. You've got to be different somehow if you're going to attract them. You can squeak by with an institution that doesn't try to differentiate itself. If you have good salespeople, if you have good marketing, if you have a good location, if you can still succeed. But I think differentiation is an important way to attract students from a distance, to attract students who are willing to pay more for what they perceive as a premium kind of a brand of some kind. And whether you do that like Quest University has tried to do, the funding model there is a whole other challenge, but trying to create a different experience for the student in small classrooms, interdisciplinary studies, block approach, etc. Or you do it like Royal Roads has done with a unique delivery model in which students are largely online, but they have these boot camp periods where they're face-to-face on a campus. They target an audience that's a little different. By and large, they've got undergraduate international programming and so on, but their graduate degree programs are aimed at working professionals, and they have a niche in a sense, right? University of Waterloo, I think, has a niche. There are some places that have done this quite well, and it means that they have a higher visibility outside of Canada than if they didn't. And I certainly think you can innovate on program as well. The challenge is, can you come up with an innovative program that won't be copied right away? Or do you need to just stay on the gerbil wheel of innovating programs every year, because it's the only way to stay ahead of everyone else who will play catch up. And it's particularly difficult when you've got to deal with government approvals on the programming. I think it's probably easier for you to innovate on services or delivery than it is on the program offerings and the degree offerings themselves. Do we have time for other?
Creating an outstanding student experience is what you're talking about through services and supports, and helping students to learn the tools of learning.
Yeah, and if you can, a distinct experience of some kind, so that it, I think the risk, outstanding can have two meanings, I guess, right? So one would be that you stand out with it, and I think that's a good thing. But if it's just excellence, that's what every university on the planet's trying to do. So yeah, something that's distinctive, that stands out, that's outstanding in that sense, I think is worth finding for each institution.
And with our new building and our growth and what more, that's what we're looking for, is how can we stand out programmatically as well as in the student experience area.
And ideally, that's what the process of strategic planning is to do, really. It's to define who are we, how are we going to be unique. If you can come up with a good answer to the question, to fill in the blank, really. UCW is Canada's blank university, or we are the best blank in the world. If you can come up with something that you can own in nationally or internationally, something that's really powerful and distinct, then the strategic plan can support that, can build towards that, can marshal resources towards that.
Any more questions or comments?
I apologize that I haven't been reading the chat. I'll have to go through those again later. It's hard to multitask to that degree.
But I think
can I ask a quick question? I know that we're over time.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Great presentation, very insightful. I'd like to know, what is your position on teaching leadership? What kind of leader role do you see us playing in the near future with all these, new normal things and whatever? How would you describe it?
Just your mic was breaking up a little. I just want to make sure. So this is about teaching our students leadership? No.
The role as of faculty as leaders in the learning community.
Right. So the idea, instead of sage of the stage, of being the guide on the side, or being sort of a leading the process of learning, but not necessarily trying to lecture the students into learning. Is that what we're talking about?
No, that's the answer that I was expecting to hear.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that it is hard, because a lot of us didn't learn that way. We learned through lecture. We enjoyed lecture, and we think that everybody enjoys lecture. And the challenge is that as each generation's gone by, the studies are telling us fewer and fewer students are enjoying lecture. And I think if we look at ourselves, we get quite impatient during lecture. Even when I try to make it as fast paced as I can, I'm sure the engaging parts of this session are when you actually get to talk with people rather than just listening.
I see. Thank you.
I think it's the same for our students. Yeah, but certainly teaching leadership is another interesting question, and in business aligned programs, that it's an important question. Is how do we teach our students not just communication skills, but employers are saying they want to see decision-making skills. They want to see students who can take initiative, students who can be critical thinking. Common sense is another thing they often talk about. So how can we prepare our students to step out and do? And I think that experiential learning piece is a big part of that. They have to be exposed to workplaces, group work, leadership roles, whether that's in athletics or in extracurricular clubs or whatever it is, an opportunity to be a leader, and incubation, entrepreneurial ventures. There's a lot of different ways one can develop those things, but how do we do that? I think it would be very difficult to do the whole job, at least through lecture, teaching someone to be a leader by telling them about how to be a leader. It would be interesting. I would take a course on that, but it wouldn't be sufficient, I don't think, to prepare a student to go out there and meet employer expectations.
I think we're aiming to do all these things. I think part of the challenge is that, as you mentioned earlier, the students coming from different educational systems and preconceptions about what education is, and sometimes they view the attempts by faculty to have more interaction in their classroom as a distraction from real learning. They want to gain the knowledge from the professor, and to them that means that they want to study the way they did in back home and do the final exam sort of thing. And so we also have to convince the students that this is a better way of learning, regardless of where they've come from, and to be open at that. And we're trying to do that through new student orientation and learning for success workshops. But it's a challenge every semester because we get a new batch every semester that have those same preconceptions. So.
Well, and I have to admit, I was one of those students who hated group work when I was a student, and
they all hate it.
Part of it is, who are your peer students, and are they people you want to spend time learning from or not, and how do you get them past that? And as you say, there are some students who aren't really looking for that, and it, back to the differentiation and niche question, it is possible that one could have an institution or a program, or at least a few faculty members in a sub-program where it is a traditional model, because that's what some students seem to want. There may be a market for that. The data tells us they won't learn as much, but they may not believe us going in. So yeah, here's a thought. I've often liked to say that marketers, the recruiters for your institution, can't really educate the market about what they should want. So if students don't think they want active learning, your recruiters aren't going to be able to convince them of that. What you need to do is bring them into the classroom and grow their minds there. So how do we teach them to like it over the course of the year, I guess? And as you say, Cindy, that's every year is going to be starting from scratch with a new crop.
Well, not every year, every semester, and we have
Sorry. There you go. So it's an ongoing thing.
It's tough. Yeah. So,
any other questions or thoughts out there? I'll try to read through the chat questions and see if there's anything that we missed there.
I think some have gone off to teach.
We have 44 left, but yes, admittedly, some people had classes.
Excuse me, can I ask a question?
Absolutely, Hassan.
All right, first of all, thank you very much for the informative presentation. That was great. So as someone who's working with the student affairs, and the UCW now has a great diversity of students around the world. So I was wondering, like, with this cultural difference, to what extent, from your experience, to what extent we can expect the students to be ready or adjustable to this new academic area, to this new environment, this Canadian environment, and what advice you can give someone in frontline workers like me in student affairs or my co-workers to help to students to get developed as soon as possible, because we have some program like we offer for a couple of years, and the students do not have like 4 years to prepare and get involved. So I was wondering to hear from you.
Well, I mean, I'm probably, you've got more experience than I do doing that job, but I do see institutions, and especially this year, there's a realization that we need to start earlier. So if, for instance, you take a look at that slide deck, the EMBER program at McMaster, starting with a summer-long orientation. Some institutions, PEI, University of PEI has a MOOC for incoming students. They started a few years back. This year, I think we've seen more and more institutions start some kind of summer-long orientation, really, to try to get them up to speed before they hit campus. And it doesn't need to be hugely labor intensive. You may have some faculty involved. Some of it can be peer teaching or peer led. Some of it can be sort of self-paced, prepared material. A lot of that academic integrity stuff is in there. But making it as mandatory as you can, and trying to get students prepared to succeed when they land at the beginning of term. That's one thing I've certainly noticed is that has been growing.
Yes, great. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Hassan. Yeah, those of you who are teachers probably know that the trick is just to shut up and wait for someone to finally ask their question and take that uncomfortable silence.
We've gone 18 minutes over your time anyway, so
yeah, sorry
I
about
really
that.
want to thank you, Ken, for laying out the context of higher education for us and the trends that you see out there and that we all can see. It's really helpful to put it all together at the beginning of our strategic planning process. And I feel like this is a really good introduction so that we can next week start our hard work of figuring out what we want to be as an institution and where we want to go. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming and spending the time. I think it's been important. I'm very pleased with the turnout, and thanks again.
My pleasure.
And we will share out your slide deck when you send them to us, Ken, and we'll share it out to the entire employee base. Yeah.
I'll embed the results of the polls in the slide deck, and then I'll also trim down the video recording of this so that if you missed something or if others missed it, they can catch it later.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again, and thank you, Ken. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Faculty will see you next week, and staff the week following for the session.
Excellent.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ken and Cindy.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.